Okay, continuing with deconstruction, we have Jacques Derrida and deconstruction. And so these are some of his thoughts about what is deconstruction. Um, he has a problem with people saying that they're absolute truths, because for him, absolute truths place limitations on our thought. The idea if we say that something is absolutely right or wrong is a bit problematic, because if we say something like, it's absolutely wrong to steal, and we can agree stealing is bad. Well, then we get to the exception where we have, let's say, a poor person who works, but all the money goes to pay the bills and steals a loaf of bread. Does that person need to go to jail? Um, does the person need to be let off the hook? What is the how how do we deal with that as an absolute truth to say stealing is bad? So he's just saying, instead of saying it's an absolute stealing is bad, let's just explore the implications of stealing. So instead of putting it as an absolute truth, because that limits what you can think, we'll instead look at it differently. He says conventions that are imposed by society do not really exist. And this is the idea of social constructions or constructs. So, for example, even laws. Most of what we think about what we can and cannot do now is not natural. It's something that has been put in place artificially. A lot of the things, I mean, for example, if we were going to say, well, it's natural, we come into this world naked, why do we all then put on clothes? Because society has said that outside of your house or a few other places, possibly, clothes need to be worn. And that's just something we all accept and do, but that doesn't mean that it really exists, this idea of wearing clothes, because we're born naked, Adam and Eve were naked, etc. Assumptions we pick up from history are oppressive, meaning if we tie ourselves too much in, well, this is the way it's always been, that's the way it'll always be, then we just feel like there's no change possible. So instead, we have to temper the ideas that we have about history. Understand that there is history there, but that shouldn't stop us for looking forward, because history shouldn't tie us down. He also said there are no limits on what is possible for one to think or believe. The sky's the limit. That's a common idea. And the role of the critic is to look for inconsistencies in the text, not just to try and figure out, okay, this was an ending, it was a good book, fine. That when we take on the role of looking at a text, then we are obligated, from his point of view, to look at what are the internal inconsistencies, what doesn't make sense within the story, and why doesn't it make sense. And then figuring all that out may bring us to a greater understanding of the text. And as we get through this semester toward the very end, we will understand that a little bit more. That some of the things that we think we're seeing and understanding now turns out to not quite be what it was. And so the inconsistencies were there for a reason. And if we explore those reasons, at the time new episodes haven't come out, we don't know what they are, but we can recognize there's a problem here. There's something that doesn't quite mesh, so our meaning is not going to match up with what the text really is. Because when we go back later and see how everything was playing out, we're going to understand that there's a more deeper meaning to it. And this example we'll see with Clara in the last season. We kind of think and are wondering one way what she is, who she is, because the doctor keeps referring to her as the impossible girl. And we see her in different places, different things, and we start to have an idea of who she is. But sometimes it's at odds with what is a possibility. Then we go back later on, when we finally get to the end of the season, and the last episode explains it. Then when you think back to all the previous episodes you've watched, you said, okay, that's why it was portrayed like this. This is why it was done like this, and this is why it didn't make sense at the time, but now it does. So sometimes we just have to look at the inconsistencies and understand there is a deeper meaning. There has to be, unless the author is just being lazy. If not, then there's a deeper meaning, and we'll find it one way or another. So what else is deconstruction? It is a verbal work of art. It can be any kind of work of art. It doesn't have to be a novel or a poem. It can be an episode of Doctor Who. It can be a painting. It can be a song. Anything that we're going to quote unquote read and examine is a text. It will have literal and non-literal meanings. Sometimes the meanings can be paradoxical. There's not always any kind of what Derrida says of a harmonious fusion of literal and figurative meanings, but often there's a conflict between the two. That when you say one thing but you mean another, and then what the one thing truly means is a conflict. It's either ironic, could be a paradox, but that's fine, because that is going to give us more to look at and reveal a deeper meaning. Normally, deconstructionists try to relate their works with other texts, intertextuality. So that's why intertextuality is becoming important, because it allows us to look at a deeper meaning of a text based on the intertexts that it mentions. It gives us a framework for analysis. We look at the relationship between what a text says and what it does for the reader. And I'm going to go through all these steps throughout this presentation. So I understand right now some of this doesn't quite make sense, but the more you see it and we do it, the better you'll get at understanding this. Normally what you need to do first is ask yourself, what is the goal of the text? Is it just to inform me? Is it to educate me? Is it to entertain me? And does it do that?